Hello, everybody. It's great to be here with you all. Before we get started and before I introduce the speakers on our panel, I just want to cover a few housekeeping notes. I just want to make sure that particularly the panelists have their speakers on, and you're on mute until I introduce you. I apologize for some of the disruptions that we had earlier on. That was unforeseen. We had planned to have questions during this breakout period, but we won't have any opportunity for direct questions during this session. If you do have questions, please do email ran@gov.bc.ca. So in this session, we're trying to broadly discuss climate change and the challenge it presents to farmers in our province and across the food sector. So I'm really pleased to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Kent Mullinex. A friend of mine. He's a director of the Institute for Sustainable Food Systems and Applied Research and Extension Unit, Kwantlen Polytechnic University, KPU. His research and extension work now focuses on ecologically sound crop production, agricultural education programming, bioregional food systems, and family-based agricultural revitalization, all as a foundation and integral to a sustainable society. Kent, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sean. It's a real pleasure to join everyone this evening. I want to tell you that I am coming to you from the traditional and unceded lands of the Sioux Nation, where I'm humbled and honored to live. I'm grateful. When it comes to battling climate change, agriculture certainly has a significant role to play, but it's in between a rock and a hard place. And I want to spend a little time laying that out and offer ways that I think we should move forward. First, though, I think we need to acknowledge that global warming and climate change is but one symptom of a much larger problem. The problem of ecological overshoot. In my mind, the two cannot be addressed independent of one another. The fact is that the global human enterprise, all the things we do, consume more natural resources than Earth can provide and produces more waste than the Earth can absorb. Our agriculture and food systems certainly contribute substantially to this. Just consider when agriculture arose 11,000 years ago, humans represented about 2% of the Earth's mammalian biomass. Today, we and our livestock represent approximately 96% of the Earth's biomass, mammalian biomass. We're farming about 50% of the Earth's surface. Our agriculture uses 75% of all fresh water. Simply put, our agriculture system is overwhelming the Earth's natural resources and it depends on and is derailing much of the ecological integrity of the Earth in the process. Agriculture and our food system are concomitantly entirely dependent on direct and embedded fossil fuel energy and responsible for substantial greenhouse gas emissions. By current estimations, as much as 1/3 of all anthropogenic greenhouse gases come from our food system. Mechanization, nutrient provision, soil management, pest management, irrigation, animal production, storage, processing, distribution, retail, all contribute to greenhouse gas emissions directly or indirectly. So what are we to do to wean agri-food system off of CO2 generating fossil fuel dependence and production practices that result in excessive greenhouse gas emissions. I would like to quickly share some of my thinking on this. Some of what I will suggest may be considered pie in the sky or Luddite or anti-progress or not capable of feeding the world. But I genuinely disagree, or I wouldn't be offering them to you. And I would like to evoke Albert Einstein's sage admonition that you can't change the problems you face with the same kind of thinking that created them. So I implore us to think differently. First, we must part ways with the industrial agriculture paradigm and embrace a new agriculture paradigm rooted in restoring and maintaining agriculture and the Earth's ecological integrity. It must be deeply committed to sustainability and genuine regenerativeness. Agroecology offers such a framework for a new agriculture paradigm. Regenerative agriculture is predicated on agroecology, biologically based tools and methods and natural processes. And I'd like to add that organic agriculture is, to date, the best codified regenerative agriculture method we have. But there remains a lot to be done, a lot to be improved on, like tillage reduction and integrated crop and livestock systems and much, much more. We must wean agriculture off of its dependence on energy-intensive production practices. To do so, I believe we need to bring back an agriculture that is far less dependent on fossil fuels and far more dependent on human and animal power. This implies, in my mind, smaller scale regional market-focused farms instead of large-scale global market-focused ones. I also believe that we must rebuild regional food systems. This includes pre-production, production, aggregation, processing, storage, distribution, and sales. Any opportunity we have to shorten supply chains, bring our food economy home, and lessen fossil fuel dependence and use, we must seize. To this end, our agri-food system economic strategies and policies must de-emphasize gross domestic product growth through industrialization and globalization and emphasize economic development via local and regional food system and development and ecologically sound agriculture. Animal agriculture must be greatly curtailed and become more ecologically benign, and we must reintegrate animal agriculture with crop production. Generally, we need to reduce global demand for animal protein. This may be the single most immediately impactful step we can take to reduce agriculture and food system the greenhouse gas footprint. A deeply regenerative, sustainable agriculture predicated on agroecological regenerative methods is knowledge intensive as opposed to input and energy intensive. It will require an extensively trained agriculturist. Richard Heinberg of the Post-Carbon Institute suggests that in North America's post-industrial agri-food system, we will require about 50 million farmers. That's about 12.5% of our population compared to the 1.5% that now is involved in farming. For this, we must put in place and support extensive experiential-based education programming. We also need to put in place ongoing technical support for agroecologically focused farmers. BC desperately needs an organic regenerative food system extension service to provide this support. Further, I would offer that an effective extension service must be directly linked to the institutions and organizations engaged in agroecological and sustainable food system research, applied research. Several of BC's universities offer tremendous extension expertise and applied research resource and capacity, but they need a directing mandate and public funding to bring forth the kind of ongoing extension and applied research needed to transition BC's agriculture and food system to its necessary post-carbon future. Technology will undoubtedly play a significant role in our sustainable regenerative agriculture future, but focusing exclusively or too much on technology, expecting it to save the day, is not only wishful thinking in my estimation, but will potentially detract us from doing what is fundamentally needed. We've got to be aware of the utility and economic implications of technology and ask the questions: is this technology affordable, and does it offer utility to smaller scale farmers or only larger ones? Does this technology advance the dominance of the global transnational agri-food system, or does it support the emergence and vitality of regional food systems? Does this technology really lessen greenhouse gas emissions and dependence on fossil fuels? Sometimes we lose sight of the fact that the simplest of technologies are those that can be most expediently and effectively put in place, like crop rotations, biological pest controls, mutualistic crop associations, providing enterprise budgets. These are the kinds of technologies that the National Farmers Union says that farmers are immensely interested in, and I hope we don't lose sight of that. So this is my high-level assessment of climate change challenge that's faced by the agri-food system and relative to agriculture and technology. Many will, I know, will dismiss the imperative of climate change, and just as climate change in agriculture, just as others have dismissed climate change altogether. Many farmers, I know, will fear that what will happen to their farms and the ability to support their families if they step away from a global industrial food system juggernaut. And I don't blame them. It's absolutely misguided to place the entire onus on farmers, as we generally do. Farmers have absolutely the least power in our food system. They are at the mercy, literally the mercy, of consolidated hegemonic transnational food corporations, especially the post-production sector that seek the low-cost producer regardless of environmental or social consequence. If we really expect our food system to transition to being regenerative and contribute substantially to combating global warming, then it really is high time that we rein in the power of these transnational corporations and give economic clout back to farmers and communities. Lastly, and most importantly, I would offer that we all need to embrace a singular vision: farmers, policymakers, businesses, business people, society at large. We can no longer afford to be at odds within the food system or society. We have to pull together, much like we did in World War II. The climate change challenge is no less clear, no less serious, and no less formidable. With a common vision and collaboration, we can achieve a sustainable regenerative food system future and be confident that nobody will be left behind in the process. I realize that this is a gargantuan and complex proposition. There's much to figure out, and the transformation I suggest represents a bit of a leap of faith. But time is of the essence. We are at the 11th hour, and if we are to avoid the 3-degree temperature increase that Dr. Weaver spoke of, our agriculture and food system has a critical role to play. And I would offer that we need to take this leap of faith together. Thank you.
Thanks, Kent, and yeah, I'm ready to take it with you. I appreciate that sentiment, and I really appreciate you trying to inspire us all to take that leap. Now I'm pleased to welcome our next speaker, Ioni Smith. Ioni Smith is the owner and operator of Upland Agricultural Consulting, which she founded in 2010. She is currently providing program management services for the Farmland Advantage Initiative, which is being administered by the Investment Agriculture Foundation. Ioni is a professional agrologist with a background in community engagement, agricultural planning, and land resource science. Ioni.
Thank you, Sean. Just wondering how the PowerPoint's going to work, because I know Kent didn't have one. Pilot scale for several years, and based on some very helpful support from Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries and the Healthy Watershed Initiative, as well as Environment and Climate Change Canada, the program has been brought under Investment Agriculture Foundation in order to bring it up to a provincial scale initiative. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that in the next few minutes. Next slide, please. In terms of process, the way it works is the program targets specific areas which are determined to be of high value ecosystem regions, such as riparian areas, so in watersheds that are considered particularly at risk or vulnerable, or grasslands areas, which we're also working on this year. And that's done using a vetted methodology, using GIS mapping and so on and so forth. Many of you may have heard of the Environmental Farm Plan, which looks at beneficial management practices. And this program is complementary to the Environmental Farm Plan program, but it's a bit different in that we approach farmers rather than farmers volunteering to become part of the program. So we identify the regions or the watersheds first, and then we contact farmers to see if they would be interested in participating. As I mentioned, we're currently looking at riparian and grassland ecosystems, but we're hoping to expand that in the next few years as well. The way that it works is that we pair up planning advisors to the farms, and health assessments are conducted, and then a restoration prescription or a management plan is produced. And then the program helps to cover the cost of the restoration work being undertaken, and we do that in partnership with existing restoration organizations. And then the farmers are paid to maintain that restoration work over time. And the financial incentives are modest, but what it helps to do is to recognize that farmers are key players and really important partnerships in nature-based climate solutions. And I will just mention that one of the really interesting things that I've noted is that this is an incredible job creator. So far, and I'll talk a little bit more about the specific sites, but we've noted an average of 2.8 jobs being created for every site that we brought on through Farmland Advantage. Next slide, please. We're really lucky to have an amazing steering committee. I'm just listing in this next slide the groups that are represented through the steering committee, but everything from the BC Agriculture Council to Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries, Ministry of Environment, Environment, Climate Change Canada, Gathering Voices Society, and so on. If you could skip ahead, please. I think I'm one slide behind now. Yeah. Next slide, please. So some of the key concepts to keep in mind with this program is that we have some ecosystem priorities that we are trying to address. So these key ecosystem priorities are increasing on-farm habitat for biodiversity, improving water quality and quantity, reducing the threat of wildfires, and maximizing soil health and carbon retention sequestration. And we're looking also at some of the co-benefits. So that's the ecosystem services that can be derived from some of those restoration activities, and that's clean water and flood mitigation, wildlife and pollinator habitat, native grasslands protection, looking at minimizing soil erosion and loss, as well as carbon retention and sequestration. Next slide, please. So I'm going to just talk for a couple of minutes about the riparian ecosystem work that we're undertaking. And just to set the scene, it probably goes without saying, but most of BC's agricultural land is of course located on valley bottoms because it's the richest and most fertile soil. So a lot of the farms in BC are located adjacent to rivers and other water bodies. And of course, that's some of the most important habitat for salmon as well as species at risk. Next slide, please. So looking at some of the prescription that comes out of the Farmland Advantage program, these are just some examples of what might be prescribed. It's not necessarily rocket science and it's not necessarily super high tech, but it's really important actions that we can undertake at the field level, and we can do it in partnership with farmers, and they can take on this important stewardship role in making sure that some of these really important ecosystems are protected. So everything from fencing waterways to reduce livestock access, to taking out invasive species, replanting them with native species, and making sure that the invasives don't come back. Installing beaver guards, that's become a really big issue on the Lower Mainland, on Vancouver Island as well, and looking at improvements to bank stabilization to minimize soil loss. Next slide, please. This year, so this is the first year that we've taken out of the pilot scale, and we're looking at 30 sites for the riparian regions. Oh, that's my watch talking to me. So we've got 4 specific ecosystems, regions in the province. We're looking at the Coxsilo watershed in the Cowichan Valley, Little Campbell River in Surrey, Bertrand Creek in Langley, and the Upper Columbia headwaters in the East Kootenays. The program has been so successful that so far we've had to start a waiting list for next year. We've basically gone past what we were hoping to target because so many people have become interested in the program. So it's a really good sign. Next slide, please. And the other ecosystem that we're looking at, of course, is grasslands. You know, there's quite a lot of species at risk that depend on grasslands for their survival. In fact, about 1/3 of them. And grasslands occupy less than 1% of our entire area in British Columbia. There have been impacts over the years from overgrazing and certain crop practices. So we're looking to target grasslands to restore and improve that ecosystem as well. It's also an incredible carbon storage or carbon sink. So our grasslands are estimated to store between 75 and over 200 million tons of carbon. Next slide, please. Some examples of grasslands prescriptions are fencing to manage livestock grazing, looking at also removing invasive species and replanting with natives. Thinning forest ingrowth, this has become a really big one because it will help to minimize wildfire risk. And we could see on a map recently this year, areas that had undergone some of this best management practice being much less impacted by wildfires. It was really interesting to see. And so, of course, what we're hoping to see as a result is this healthy grasslands with a diversity of plant species, soil nutrients, and carbon retention. Next slide. And so with the grasslands funding that we received, we were targeting 20 sites in 3 specific areas: the South Okanagan Similkameen, North Okanagan Shuswap, and the Southern Interior Caribou. At this point, we've identified all those sites. There's also now a waiting list underway. We had a bit of a delay because of the wildfires, but we're starting to get the restoration work underway just now. Next slide, please. So just in terms of next steps, we are at the point where most of the health assessments have been completed. The restoration work is now beginning. One of the things that's really important for us is to make sure we're collecting data. So it's important for us to monitor these indicators over time, not just species and habitat protection, but also things like the length of the riparian area that's been protected. We're also working with researchers to try to start to measure carbon, soil carbon, and track it over time. We are starting to also issue payments to the farmers, and of a really important priority for us is to be looking at some longer term financing mechanisms so we can make sure that our funding base is diversified. Next slide. So this is really the last slide, and I just wanted to finish by saying thanks to all the funders. I mentioned Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries, the Healthy Watersheds Initiative, which is being administered by the Real Estate Foundation, Environment and Climate Change Canada through the SARPAL, or the Species at Risk Partnerships on Agricultural Land program, the Windermere Farmers Institute, the Shuswap Indian Band, Township of Langley, and Ducks Unlimited. Next slide. And that's it. Thanks very much for your time.
Thanks, Ioni. That was great. It's an incredible program. Next, I would like to introduce Serena Black, who I've had the pleasure to work with over the last few years. She wears a number of hats, but in this situation, she's wearing the hat as a professional agrologist and the general manager of the BC Forage Council, provincial producer organization focused on enhancing agricultural and integrated production systems. Serena's work is driven by her passion to work on producer-driven projects that will enable producers to adapt to a changing climate and strengthen their resilience and capacity to develop environmentally and economically sustainable operations. Serena, it's over to you.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to be here, and I'm excited to be joining this panel. To begin, I do want to acknowledge that I am joining in this evening as a guest living in the traditional unceded territory of the Lheidli today at the confluence of the Nechako and Fraser Rivers. And I'm thrilled to be here to speak on both forage and climate change, ironically, two of my favorite topics that take up a lot of my time. Next slide, please. So normally I'd prefer to skip this part in a presentation, but being a virtual conference, we might not have the opportunity to get to know each other the same way. So here's one of the dorkiest ag-related photos that I have taken recently. This photo was actually taken just over a week ago at one of the Forage Council's farm partners research plots in Grand Forks. Our farm partner wanted to explore diverse annual forage cropping systems for pasture rejuvenation. And I think you know you're working in the right job when you see regrowth in a turnip and you get so excited you have to take a selfie. So with my unique educational background in both journalism and a Master of Science, along with my experience of being born and raised in the Caribou, it's really impacted the work that I do with the Forage Council. And I wanted to maybe share a few principles that I hold so that you can understand a little bit more about me and the work I'm about to present. So first, my work is grounded in farmers and ranchers and what they need to keep on doing what they do best, which is to grow our food. I try to spend as much time as possible on farms and ranches and talking and learning from the farmers themselves, having them walk me around their field, showing me what they are doing, and try to bring that knowledge and that perspective to every table that I sit at. Two, I believe in curiosity and nuance. I think we need to learn how to spend a lot more time asking questions before we try to provide the answers. And three, collaboration and building trust and establishing meaningful relationships is what I believe the only way we're going to be able to make impact and inspire change. So hopefully you'll see how some of those principles will follow through in my presentation today. Next slide, please. So to start thinking about what the forage sector looks like in BC, it is a substantial sector in the province, covering more than 75% of all of BC farmland, as listed in 2016. This area includes natural pasture, tame or seeded pasture, alfalfa and mixed hay, other tame and fodder crops, corn silage, and of course, forage seed production. It covers every single region throughout the province and is essential to supporting all of the livestock sectors that exist. Beef cattle, dairy, horses, sheep, and goats. You get the picture. Next slide, please. And what does climate change, therefore, mean to our sector? Well, this photo is from the wildfires of 2018. I think it illustrates what producers are actually experiencing on their landscape, if you can kind of imagine standing in their shoes and seeing this. And at a directors meeting a few months ago, I've heard stories from every region in our province talking about substantial yield losses in their forage production, as well as from the regions that we normally import our forages from, both Alberta, Washington. So really seeing this impact already on the landscape. Next slide, please. And when we're thinking about climate change, I do think it's important for us to consider production challenges, economics, and social components. You'll see here that I tend to focus a little bit more on the production challenges, but something we can't ignore are that these are all interrelated. So there are obviously challenges that are impacting producers on the ground, and this results in substantial influxes in the economics. And because of this, if you think about how forage for winter feed is one of the largest expenses for a livestock producer, the prices will fluctuate substantially year to year, region to region, and it's very difficult for a producer to be able to manage that economic stress. And therefore, it also links to the social and cultural impacts on farmers. There are some substantial mental health challenges that you would experience during these times. And I think we can't ignore the need for farmers to have the resources to continue to build their strong communities to help them move forward together in these challenges. Next slide, please. So when you're thinking about this holistically, we need to think of a system as a whole, and what the BC Forage Council is trying to do is to work collaboratively to bring the right people together that in order to be able to address these challenges in a meaningful way on the ground. Next slide, please. When we want to think about the actual production challenges that we're seeing on the ground, all of these pictures are from this summer and different farm partners that I'm working with. So in this photo itself, it was bright green and lush in the spring, coming off from all the winter and snow melt off. But by midsummer, it actually lost all of the biomass it started with before it could even be harvested. And largely because of that extended heat and the drought conditions. Next slide. Even with irrigation, we're seeing significant challenges in getting uniform crop establishment. So with spring and summer conditions being so unpredictable and farmers being unable to really plan for that and to get that resilience built in, we're seeing the windows for seeding harvest becoming narrower and more unpredictable, making it very difficult to make management decisions of when to replant, when to harvest, all of those pieces. Next slide. And these extreme conditions also will impact other dynamics. And this one here, looking at pests. So if you have stressed out, weak, vulnerable plants, they're not going to be able to have the same amount of defenses against these pests. And there are some regions in our province that have never had to deal with these type of challenges in the past. So they are constantly trying to they are now in a place where they have to be looking at new skills and knowledge to be able to manage these things and these new dynamics moving forward. Next slide, please. Now, the thesis of kind of what I want to talk to here today is I want us to remember that we all need to eat. This is critical to our entire community's survival. So when I think about climate change and its impacts, I think what the true challenge is how can we ensure that individual farmers can continue to farm? What can we do to make sure that they can continue to be stewards of the land and build resilient agriculture systems? Production systems that keep their businesses afloat. So we're looking at supporting individuals, we're looking at supporting them on an operational level, and that can then also make sure that we're finding success on the broader landscapes, finding and building a system that will keep our ecosystems healthy, functioning, providing co-benefits to all the other sectors that we interact with. Next slide, please. So what the BC Forage Council is doing is trying to be extremely active in providing these producer-directed research, trying to find grounded solutions to address these fluctuating conditions that we're experiencing. I'll briefly highlight that we are now into our third year of our innovative no-till pasture rejuvenation practices project. In these projects, each farmer was able to design their own research plot based on their own questions, trialing specific beneficial management practices that they thought that would work on their production and trying to figure out how to integrate them into what they were already doing. We were able to measure baseline soil carbon at the start of the project, putting some real quantitative measures on the soil quality impacts of incorporating these new practices would be, and we're having some pretty exciting results and lessons along the way. It's also important to note that for the Forage Council, the knowledge and transfer extension is an extremely integral part to what we're doing on the landscape, or doing in order to support farmers. And it's not just, we're looking at finding opportunities to build both farmer to farmer knowledge sharing as well as researcher to farmer. It's an integral component to all of the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. So the research that we have done has really been focused on assessing some nationally identified beneficial management practices, creating a short list of BMPs that are listed here, including some rotational grazing that we heard at the video earlier today, And it's really a tremendous opportunity to look at how to sequester carbon in forage production. This is a benefit not only to the farmers, but to our community as well. And then thinking about the conference we're currently on, when you consider the 5 core principles of regenerative agriculture, looking at minimizing soil disturbance, maximizing crop diversity, keeping the soils covered, maintaining that root growth year round, and integrating livestock, well, I can easily argue that forage supports every single one of these principles. We are deeply positioned to make a difference when we start talking about carbon sequestration and incorporating regenerative practices. So exploring ways in which we can build a farmer's resilience to help them adapt to climate change and to continue to feed us, which is what I'm most concentrated on. Next slide, please. In order to do that, I do believe that we need to start analyzing this data and these practices specifically within a BC context. We are so diverse that we have to make sure that we are trialing these production principles in local growing conditions to confirm that they're beneficial. Next slide, please. Now I'm going to say that we know that there are some data gaps that need to be addressed in order to help these farmers thrive in their production. Oh, sorry, I just lost my place. To thrive in their production. The few that I'm going to mention here today is both comments that I've received from farmers, but also from researchers who I'm constantly working with. And next slide. We're looking at more data being required for weather. Next slide. Water. Next slide. And soil data. And I identified these gaps through my work with the BC Agricultural Climate Adaptation Research Network. Next slide, please. So I'm a bit biased, but I would say that BC ACARN is leading the way in ensuring that we have a provincial network that is dedicated to climate change adaptation research for the BC agricultural sector. It has representatives from academic institutions throughout the province. Next slide. As well as from the Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Fisheries, and Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada. This network is consistently trying to work to address these data gaps and are tireless in their strategically trying to find out what we can do to move forward to address these climate change impacts. Next slide, please. I linked to this specifically because part of addressing this goal, ACARN does help coordinate regional and provincial extension events and workshops, working collaboratively with academic, government, and industry sectors. Indeed, they're hosting a workshop this December focused on forage and cattle sectors, so it is specifically something that is top of mind for the BC Forage Council currently. So the Forage Council is thrilled to be able to have these type of events being organized to help progress the important work that is being done throughout the province and to provide some strategic leadership within this realm. Next slide. So I'll conclude by saying that the challenge that we are facing is how do we support farmers to keep on farming? We need to continue focusing on providing our members with as much resources as possible to help them to continue to sequester carbon into the soil, learn how to adapt to these changing conditions, provide policies that support them in actually making this transition to adopting resilient production practices, and so that they can continue to feed our communities. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Serena. And yeah, as a member of ACARN, I would agree that we are doing good work in providing some scientific guidance to how to address some of these challenges. So last but definitely not least, I would like to introduce Jacob Beaton as our next speaker. Jacob Beaton is currently runs Tea Creek Farm with his wife, Jessica, located in Kitwanga in Gitsan territory. He is Shimshan, and he's the recipient of the BCAF Indigenous Business Award. Jacob has consulted with over 60 First Nations on strategy, community engagement, and economic development. Jacob, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. It's really good to be here. And I have a fairly significant slide deck that I'm not using. I actually created a brand new one just for this conference. So I didn't realize I wouldn't be able to control the presentation, so I might be saying next quite a bit here. So thank you very much for having me. My name is Jacob. My tribal name is Jopwashkatwanskik. I am Lochskik or Eagle Clan from the coast here. My mother's from Prince Rupert, and I live in Gitxsan territory, although I'm not Gitxsan. Absolutely love it here. It's gorgeous. Our business is Tea Creek Enterprises, and we are Indigenous owned, Indigenous operated, Indigenous staffed, and we are worked with over 100 different Indigenous participants this year on our training farm. So with that, next, please. So I wanted to start by saying that we're not a farm. We actually removed the name, took the word farm out of our name. We're just Tea Creek now. We're not farmers. Next, please. We do produce a lot of food, so don't get us wrong. I mean, we produce an incredible amount through what a lot of people would call intense organic methods of growing. We borrow a lot of best practices. Whenever we find great ideas, we adopt them and we put them to work here. Next. Also, we're not climate change experts. This kind of makes me anxious being on this panel and presenting. Next. However, there are a lot of experts here with me, so I feel like I'm in good company and well taken care of on the panel. But there are climates that I would love to change. Of course, our global climate weather is one of them. Another one is the climate that's anti-farmer that I find myself in, and the reason we removed farm, the word farm, from our logo. There's a climate of discrimination against farmers being, stupid or uneducated, when it's actually the opposite, right? Like, you have to know an incredible amount to be successful in this industry. There's also a climate of trauma as an Indigenous person, a multi-layered trauma over many generations that we're dealing with. And then within our province, a climate of discrimination, institutionalized discrimination against Indigenous people that we still deal with all the time, all over the place. It's another climate I'd love to change. Next. So one of the questions is, what is regeneration? I want to share with you a bit of our kind of Indigenous perspective on regeneration. Next. So first of all, we need to have a little bit of historical context. I'm not going to give an introduction to sort of Indigenous history in BC, but in our immediate valley, the valley I live in, there were 600 acres of active Indigenous farmlands, owned, operated, farmed, ranched by Indigenous people. That's now down to 0 acres. Next, please. So for us, regenerating in our mission statement, our vision and mission hasn't changed over the last year. It's about regenerating Indigenous land-based livelihoods and projects. It's a big part of what Tea Creek does. Next. Another historical thing that we work with and we tie to is this vibrant pre and post-contact Indigenous economy. One of these photos here is a famous outlaw named Simon Gunnanoot, big figure in sort of the colonial BC history. That Indigenous economy that was vibrant, every community up here had every single industry that they needed, active and healthy, pre and post contact. That Indigenous economy has been totally desiccated, and Indigenous people were dispossessed of the economy. They were not allowed to participate. To this day, First Nations are legally not allowed to own land. A First Nation cannot directly own land. So they have to own land through a corporate entity. That's the way that First Nations acquire land nowadays. And then even if you are a First Nation and you want to add land to your holdings through an addition to reserve land is not owned by First Nations. That's federally owned and held in trust for First Nations. Next, please. So these are some of the realities that we deal with up here. Our closest reserve community is Gitwangak. It has over 800 band members. 26% have full-time work out of the adult population. Next. 32% are unemployed. So there are more adult individuals who are completely unemployed than there are with full-time work. Next. The median income is $19,840 per year. I'd like you to try and imagine living on that dollar amount. That is the median income, and that is high. The other two reserves that are in our immediate valley are lower. The lowest is $13,000 per year. So I want you to try and imagine being unemployed, which is the largest sector of the adult Indigenous population here. Our Indigenous population in this valley, and the next one over is 8,000 people. And try to imagine having a job, getting educated, getting ahead in this economy. Next. So for us, a big part of solving this is regenerating Indigenous trades. Through our programs, we introduce people, Indigenous people, to carpentry, mechanics, cooking, farming, machine operation, and many other trades. Next. Part of the next step of that is the regeneration of Indigenous economy and bringing that health, wellness, and vibrancy back to our local economy, of which food is a huge part. Next. So we also deal with the history of genocide that impacts all Indigenous people. And I need to acknowledge this because it is a massive barrier. It is something that I deal with in my personal life. It impacts my entire family, extended family. Every single person who is Indigenous who works for me is dealing with this. Next. So part of what we're regenerating is reconciliation. What does this look like? Tea Creek right now is regeneration, is reconciliation in action. We're funded through one of the provincial ministries, actually the Ministry of Advanced Education and Skills Training, through some community-led programs where we are doing food sovereignty training, trades training, breaking down all these barriers and getting people active, and it's just amazing. Next. Of course, fighting climate change is a big part of what we're doing as well. I mean, the fact that we can grow the most phenomenal produce affordably, and we're not spending 14 times the carbon emission that it takes to grow the produce just to get it up here is a huge thing. The fact that we can grow an absolute abundance of healthy, affordable food locally, and a wide range. Like people come here and they're just blown away that we were growing broccoli and cauliflower that typically in the store is coming from, California, Mexico, and that they're eating fresh peppers, and we ate melons all summer, and we're doing it all locally and introducing people to that. Next. And obviously that's a huge part of reducing that carbon footprint, is making it local. So the Tea Creek model, what we do here, it is regeneration. Next. So this is maybe a little hard to read, but what our model does is we basically tackle mental, spiritual, emotional health, physical health and well-being, skills, trade, and work experience, as well as agriculture, wild food, medicine, and cultural activities, all naturally within our model and all naturally within our program. Next. So I'm just about at the end, I believe. Next. Yeah, so what we're doing here is we're regenerating people, culture, community, agriculture, skills and trade, economy, and it's amazing. Next. We also innovate. So there's a lot of innovations that I'm a business person, that's my background. I always look at things through a feasibility lens. So we're not just doing things for the sake of doing them. So we have adopted technology and ideas and from all over the place, including Asia, United States, Europe, and even Alberta. Next. So yeah, just to sum up what we do, people come here to find their passions, their gifts, and to get confidence and to get active. Next. I don't think I have time to play this little video clip, but if you go to our website, you can see this video on the website. So if we could just get past it, and I'll wrap up.
My name's Julia Daniels. I'm from Gatineau.
So just my final slide here is what do we deliver? We deliver hope. Hopefully you have a little bit more hope from just hearing from me and getting introduced to Tea Creek and what we're actually doing up here in Northwestern BC. We deliver hope. That's the main outcome from our participants when they come and we hear from them. That's what they're telling us, is that they get a lot of hope and real hope, right? It's grounded in skills, it's grounded in life skills and moving forward in their lives. So last slide, please. So I know some of you are kind of into data. I am too. My first job, or my first sort of career path, was I was going to be a computer programmer, and I just really love data. So just here's some details on us and numbers. We're in our first year. We started planning this a long time ago, a few years ago, but Tea Creek launched our programs in January. We're on a 160-acre parcel. We have 8.5 acres that are active, including our roads and buildings and spaces in between. We have 12 staff, where 80% are Indigenous. We had 148 Indigenous people sign up for training and employment this year. We've actively engaged and supported over 70. If we add in our very short-term trainees, people who are coming in for just a day or two, then we're over 100. And we are addressing all the barriers that people come with. So low income, no transportation, clothing, no food, no childcare, homelessness. We cover all of that through our programs. And we're currently working with 3 partner First Nations. So last slide now, next. And thank you. So if you'd like any more information, please go to our website, teacreek.ca. You're more than welcome to contact us there. And like I said, there's videos and some other good stuff on the website. So thanks again, everybody. And sorry we can't take active questions, because that's honestly my favorite part. But thank you to the organizers for inviting me and having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks so much, Jacob. Yeah, I really do. I feel the hope. It was quite inspirational, and actually, all of you, I feel much better than the initial doom and gloom. I appreciated Andrew's bringing us to the current situation and really breaking it down for us. But thank you, Kent, Ioni, and Serena and Jacob, for providing some concrete ways that we can help address that problem. And I know that we can't take questions from the audience, but I do have a question for each of you. Based on Andrew's presentation, it's very clear that there's some urgency to action. And all of you have presented some great ideas. What I'm interested in is hearing, how do we mobilize the widespread adoption in as quick as possible action to address these problems? So yeah, how do we mobilize the masses? How do we increase the ideas that you presented tonight?
Should I go first?
Sure. Yeah, go for it, Jacob.
You know what, for me, part of my story is I'm not a farmer, right? Like I said that at the beginning, but we were gardening, and I was battling with weeds. The only thing I want to say to answer the question is, I think knowledge is absolutely key. We are starving for the information that we can quickly turn into action. So that's one really big one for us. I had no idea the kind of agriculture that we're practicing. I didn't even know it existed 3 years ago. And it took me doing a lot of research and going out and touring farms and seeing it in action to realize, oh my goodness, it completely blew my mind. It was a massive paradigm shift to realize that we could grow an abundance of healthy, affordable food locally in our climate. So I think education is absolutely key for me, and then making that education into action as quickly as possible.
Thanks. Other ideas?
I can go. I would say, just keeping on brand with the Farmland Advantage program that I was talking about, I think, actually offering payment for those ecosystem services, bringing farmers to the table and acknowledging that the work that they're doing has value. The work that they're doing as climate, resiliency warriors really is a role that we need to value, and we need to put money on the table to make that clear. And I think that's one way of really bringing more and more people to the table and opening up the conversation and putting that kind of economic value to the work that needs to be done on the land.
Thanks, Ioni. Other ideas?
I can cheat and use my a little bit of my own introduction of what I spend a lot of time thinking about, and how do you inspire change? How do you sit down face to face with the farmer and build that? Like, I think it is about building relationships, building trust, not coming in asking more questions than you trying to provide solutions. Because I think if you come in without that curiosity, without that willingness to work together and find a solution together and to collaborate, I think collaboration in relationships, then there is a very quick tendency to stop listening. So if you're being told you're doing it wrong, or that you're like, without asking questions of why you got there, I think would be a hesitancy from a farmer to really open up their thoughts about the different management practices and how they could incorporate it. So I think it's urgent, and building relationships takes time. So it's kind of a paradox. Both are true. We need to do this urgently, but we need to take the time to build the relationships, have the conversations, and find those solutions. I think in BC, it is extremely diverse in so many great ways. A diversity of commodities that we're growing, diversity of ecosystems, a diversity of climate, of topography, all of it together. There's not going to be a silver bullet saying this is the one thing that's going to change everything. I think we have to work collaboratively between all the different stakeholders with different skill sets, so that we understand how to have the best science, so we understand how to share information in the best way possible, how to have policies that actually support those changes, informed strategic policies that will gear us towards that shift and provide producers with the ability to make that transition. I think we all know where the goalpost is, but we don't necessarily know what path each farmer needs to take to get there. And there's a lot of risk associated with that. So we need the research, we need Farmland Advantage, looking at those ecosystems. We need all of these approaches talking to each other collaboratively, looking at a transdisciplinary approach. But again, it's the paradox of long-term relationship building and the urgency of really needing to see this change happen right away. So maybe not an answer.
No, it is a paradox. We just need more time. Ken, final words. We're 15 minutes over time, but what are your thoughts on this? How do we get this going?
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. First, I think we need a vision for our agriculture and food system future. But I think that vision has to be rooted in an examination of what it is to be human, and what our primary job is. And I think our primary job needs to be to nurture Mother Earth and each other. And we need to commit ourselves to this. And I think that kind of commitment with vision can bring us all together, as Serena was saying, and then to solve this problem, we are going to have to work together. There can't be any opposition. And it's just high time that we all agreed on what the challenge is and what we're going to do to meet it.
Well, on that note, I really do appreciate all of your sentiments. I do feel like we are working together, and I look forward to continuing our work, and we have a big challenge ahead of us. For all of those of you who are joining us tonight, thank you for taking your time. Thank you for the speakers who contributed their thoughts. And I hope you all will join us again tomorrow night. We'll start at 6 p.m. Yeah, we've got a big challenge ahead of us. Thank you.